In this video, we shall be going over the default parameter feature that was introduced in ES6. But before you dive into this video, I will also recommend that you watch my video about arguments object and also about the rest parameter. Hey, my name is Kelvin and I am a software developer based in Nairobi, Kenya. And my goal is to help you go through technical documentations so that you may have an understanding of the tools that you're working with. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to the channels, like this video, and leave a comment below. All the links that will be mentioned in this video will be available in the description sections and also in the comment below. Let us dive in. If you are using VS Code, I would recommend that you install the Quokka.js extension. And what this extension does, it logs values at runtime directly in your editor. But if you are not using VS Code, you can still follow along using your console. Here is an example of what Quokka.js is doing. I have a function, then you can see the runtime value is being logged directly in my editor. Let us get some definition out of the way. We do know that when you define a function, you can also define parameters or a list of parameters. But the values that you pass in a function during a function call, those are arguments. By default, the parameters are undefined. Let me just remove this so that we can see this. You can see by default, the parameters are undefined. Previously, before ES6, we used to have a hack to be able to manage this. For instance, if you wanted to have a default value, you could use undefined. You could check for undefined, then pass in the value. An example would be like this. This line of code is basically checking to see whether the parameter is undefined and evaluating it to the default value of high. So you can see that I'm calling the function and I'm not passing any arguments to it. And by default, it will evaluate to undefined, hence console logging high on the screen. But if we pass in an argument, you can see that it is evaluating to the argument that we pass in of hello. Also notice that if we pass in undefined, it is also defaulting to the default value. One of the key features that was introduced in ES6 was default parameters. So instead of writing all these lines of code, we can basically get rid of that and have it defined at the parameter level. And I don't know about you, but that to me looks very clean, short, and nice. So if we have undefined, it will evaluate to the default parameter. And if we pass in another argument, you can see that the default parameter gets overridden to the argument that we passed into the function. Also notice that if we pass in undefined, it will default to the default value. One beautiful thing about the default parameter is it is evaluated at runtime, which means the default parameter can be anything, even a function. Let us look at this example. Let us define a simple function called hello. And you can see that we are getting the value of high, which is the return value of the hello function. So the default parameter gets evaluated at runtime, and that means you can pass in a function. But maybe one thing to notice is its relationship with the arguments object. If you haven't watched my previous video about the arguments object, you can check it out. I link it up in the card above. I would also recommend that you look at the rest parameter video. I will also be linking it up in the card above. One thing to note is the arguments object always defaults to the arguments that are passed into the function. That's a mouthful. Let us break it down. In order to get the clear picture, let us get rid of any argument that is being passed into the function. So one thing that you'll notice about the arguments object is it doesn't evaluate to the default parameters of ES6. It will always take into account the arguments that are being passed into the function and not the default parameter. So if I change this to hello, you can immediately see that it gets registered in the arguments object as the first index. And when I add another one, you can see that it continues adding it to the list. So the arguments object always takes into account the arguments that are being passed into the function rather than the default parameters that are defined to the function. If you have found value in this video, don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave a comment below. All the links that have been mentioned in this video will be available in the description section. Thank you and see you soon.